Welcome to another edition of Hey DT. Hey DT is a series of videos I do where I respond to viewer questions and comments. These viewer questions and comments come from the comments on the videos posted on YouTube and Odyssey. Sometimes they come through social media such as Reddit. Sometimes they come through email. And the very first question I want to respond to is, hey DT, how do you get a trapped mouse out of Virt Manager and back to the desktop? So what he's asking about here is sometimes when you're inside a virtual machine, and specifically he's talking about inside Virt Manager, but this may happen in other virtualization programs like VirtualBox or whatever. Sometimes the mouse cursor will get trapped inside the virtual machine to where you can no longer get outside of the virtual machine with your mouse. So you're kind of stuck in the virtual machine and you have no way to exit the virtual machine sometimes, because to close the virtual machine, you actually have to have the mouse outside of the VM to go into the menu system of Virt Manager and forcefully shut down the VM. So when you end up in a situation like this, I don't know why this particular situation sometimes does happen, but when it does happen, there is a trick you can use to get that mouse cursor back outside of the VM. You could drop to a TTY. So do your standard Control Alt and then one of the function keys like F3 to switch over to TTY3. And then you're inside a TTY. Now, if you Control Alt and go to F2 or F1, whatever the main graphical environment, which TTY it's on, switch back into your desktop environment, your mouse cursor will now be free. And that's a little trick you can use. Again, I wish I had an answer for why that happens. I wish I had a better answer for how to escape it, but just drop to a TTY, then come back to your graphical environment and you should be okay. Moving on to the next question. And sometimes I get strange questions and comments, things that I really don't know where this even comes from, but hey DT, why don't you create a channel about mystery videos and horror videos? I don't know what that means. Mystery videos and horror videos. Are you talking about me possibly reviewing or reacting to mystery movies or horror movies? What's a mystery video and a horror video? Is this, I don't know, reacting to other like YouTube stuff? I'm not sure what you're asking. I don't even know why you're asking this, because I don't think I've ever mentioned anything about liking mystery books or mystery videos. I do like watching horror movies on occasion, but I really don't talk about that ever on the channel. Again, some of these questions and comments, they come out of left field, but will I ever create a channel based around any of that? I would say highly unlikely. The next question is a rather lengthy one. He writes, hey DT, I watch your videos a lot and I enjoy the content. I am running Arch and I've never been able to get flameshot to work right. It's frustrating because it worked on Pop! OS, but I prefer Arch. I use screenshots 100 times a day for work and flameshot would be a huge improvement over what I use now. Any advice on making it work? I agree. Flameshot is fantastic, especially if you take a lot of screenshots. I've gotten into the habit of taking a lot of desktop screenshots, sometimes of Windows or particular areas of Windows, and flameshot's really just a fantastic tool. It can be flaky depending on what desktop environment you're running. Specifically, are you running Wayland? Flameshot is supposed to work on both Xorg and Wayland, but I have found that on Wayland window managers and desktop environments, it's not always working. So that could be your problem as far as you didn't mention what desktop environment you were running on Pop! OS or what you're running on Arch. But if it was a situation where you were on X11 when it was working and now you're on Wayland and it's not working, that's likely the issue. And the next question is from one of my videos. Recently, I did a video where I created a bash script for creating and removing auto-start files from the auto-start directory. And he writes, hey DT, thanks for these videos. In my case, I've been creating scripts for years and I enjoy your videos and I always find something new. We always learn something new in the Linux world. I was wondering if instead of just copying the .desktop files to your auto-start directory, what about creating a soft link to the original file to avoid having duplicates? And I would say you certainly could do this. I do think it's a little bit unnecessary to fool around with creating file links, so symlinks to various files, because with auto start files, typically you're only auto starting a handful of programs at most, for the most part. Yeah, it's not like you're dealing with a ton of files. So when you're talking about avoiding having duplicate files, you only have those duplicate files, just a handful of them, and they're really small files. We're not talking about big files at all. And they're just sitting in your auto start directory until you delete them, right? So they're only there temporarily until you no longer want that program to auto start, and then you delete the file entirely. So you certainly could do something with linking. For me, I think it's more work than is needed. I just straight copy the .desktop files from user share applications or whatever into .config/autostart. And when I no longer need that autostart program, I just do an RM on that copied file, right? So in the end, you're not going to end up with a whole lot of data that's being used on your system. Again, these are plain text files that are usually just a few lines long anyway. So they're really, really tiny files. Next up, this person asks like the most important question ever. He writes, "Hey DT, waffle or pancake?" So I do like both, but I have to say I prefer waffles just because of the pattern. You know, it's got those divots in it that really hold the butter and the syrup. Plus, it will also hold chocolate chips very nicely, especially once they melt. You know, the chocolate will get down into the grooves. It's really hard to do that with pancakes because pancakes, they're just so smooth. A lot of that sweet syrupy goodness just slides right off of it. And the next question, "Hey DT, I fully agree with you and think we should all ditch Firefox and Thunderbird. I already moved to Brave a few months ago and I started to use the Zen browser as a second browser. Now I think it's time to also move away from Thunderbird, but I'm not clear on what I should use to replace Thunderbird. Any recommendations?" Right now I'm using Thunderbird as my desktop email client. I've used most of the popular Linux desktop email clients. They all are kind of mediocre. None of them blow me away. I will say one of the best ones as far as like a native GTK application that runs on Linux, Geary, is actually a really nice email client. So I would say try that one out first. It's probably going to be your best bet as far as a replacement for Thunderbird. And moving on, the next comment, it's a comment, it's not a question. Apparently this guy was really triggered by something in my recent video I did about warning you guys about the dangers of doom scrolling, consuming constant negative content on social media and through news sites, and how inherently dangerous that is for your physical and mental health, and how it really just turns you into really a horrible person. And I mentioned that a lot of people, when you point out their flaws, when you say, hey, you're doing something that's dangerous here, most people will defend their negativity, their suffering, their hatred, right? When you point out somebody has something wrong with them, they tend to defend it. I mentioned that in this video, and like clockwork, I had several people respond with similar things such as, "Hey DT, stick to what you know, technology, you're not a psychologist and clearly make a poor therapist." So he basically, you can tell, just by the context of what he wrote. He's angry, right? And it's a video where I was trying to tell people to stop consuming negative and angry, hate-filled content because it makes you a negative, angry, hateful person. And then he responds like this. So, I'm glad that I had some of these comments in the comment section of that video because it really does highlight what's going on. I mentioned in that video, when you get angry, anytime you get angry at someone, it's because you took something personally. There was something I said in that video that he took personally. It was like I was talking directly to him, even though I don't know who this is. I'm just talking to a camera right now, right? I don't know who's going to watch this. I don't know you personally. It's not like I have any idea who's going to consume this content. And it's very arrogant and vain, for one thing, to think I know who the hell you specifically are. But it's a little disturbing that, mentally you think that I'm talking directly to you. So again, I may not be a psychologist, I may not be a therapist, but I think you need to talk to one. And next up is another comment. This might be from that same doom scrolling video. He writes, "Hey DT, some of the best advice I've ever gotten is you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. I thought you could appreciate this. Absolutely. I love that. You don't have to attend every argument that you're invited to. So I have mentioned many times on camera, you guys know I do not argue with people, especially on the internet. I never get into an internet argument. I'm not arguing with people in my YouTube comment section. I know a lot of content creators do this. I think they're absolute fools to do that. I don't argue with people on Twitter or Facebook. I don't even have social media accounts for the most part because I don't argue with people on the internet. What is the point of that? Seriously, what is the point? What are you getting? What benefit are you getting out of that? So yeah, when people invite me to an argument, I always decline. And matter of fact, it's gotten to the point where rarely do people try to argue with me in real life and online, is because they know I don't play that game. They're in that game. They're in the let's argue all the time with everybody game. I'm playing a different game. And once they realize you're not playing their game, they quit inviting you to those arguments. And another kind of related quote, Mark Twain famously said that, you really shouldn't argue with stupid people because they will have more experience than you and they're going to beat you just based on experience, right? So you never argue with stupid people. And I have a similar kind of motto I live by, having had many jobs in the past where I dealt with people on a personal level. You never get into an argument with stupid people. You never get into an argument with drunk people, and you never get into an argument with crazy people, people that are mentally disturbed in some way. There's no point. You do not. What is the point of arguing with somebody that is stupid, drunk, and or high or crazy? Like, are you, if you get into an argument with somebody that is drunk, is you yelling at them magically going to sober them up? No. You argue with somebody that is acting stupid, is you yelling at them suddenly going to make them smarter? No. Right? Again, I don't like doing things that are pointless. I don't like wasting my energy on pointless tasks. So, this is another thing in life why I don't get into a lot of arguments, is because once you eliminate all of the pointless stuff, arguing, like 99 times out of 100, arguing with somebody serves no real point. Moving on to the next question. Hey DT, I was wondering, some people blame projects for being political and quote woke for simply having a code of conduct that disallows stuff like hate speech. Stuff that is common sense, not some political activism. I'm assuming you're not speaking of such when you answered the question about politics and FOSS. Just asking to clarify because I've seen accusations of political activism that are kind of crazy. So I'm not sure what video he's responding to, but I've said many times on videos that open source projects, open source software projects, they really should not be involved in political activism at all. That is completely beyond the scope of software and freedoms around software. Like if you want to talk about free speech, freedom of the press and things like that, I think those basic freedoms kind of are tied to the idea of free software. But when you get into more social justice, political activism, then things get a little crazy because that has nothing to do with software at all. It has nothing to do with the 4 freedoms of the free software definition. It has nothing to do with open source software as far as the 10 criteria for open source software. You've kind of gone off on something different. And, at that point, you start dividing people rather than uniting people, because anytime you add politics to any organization, when you bring politics in, it's going to divide people. Politics, by its very nature, always divides people. It never brings people together. It always divides people. That's what it's designed for. It's designed to piss people off and drive them away. That's what politics is designed for. What is an open source project designed for? It's to bring in everybody. It's to be all inclusive, all types of people, all genders and races and nationalities and religions, everything you can imagine. We want everybody partaking in this. And the minute you inject politics into it, you're no longer free software. You're no longer open source software. You're just another political organization. Now, he's asking me to clarify some comments I made here. I don't know why I need to clarify You know, he may be one of these people that hangs out on social media sites like Twitter and Facebook and argues politics with people all day. And he's used to people saying things and not really meaning what they say or talking in circles or whatever. But I'm pretty straightforward. I don't typically bullshit. When I say open source software projects shouldn't be involved in political activism, I mean just that. There's nothing to interpret here. He does mention specifically codes of conduct. Do I think having a code of conduct, I guess, do I consider that political activism? Just because you have a code of conduct doesn't mean that that's political activism. You could have some statements about political activism in your code of conduct. You could say, hey, we support political activism, right? You could certainly do that in your code of conduct, but just by having a code of conduct, no, that's not political activism. Again, I think that's kind of common sense anyway. I hope I kind of answered the question. Whoever sent me in this question, I don't have the names of the folks that wrote these questions or comments. I wouldn't share that here on screen anyway, because I certainly wouldn't want to embarrass somebody if they didn't want some of this stuff read. Some of this stuff, even though a lot of it is public, sometimes some of these are private messages and things through email or whatnot. But yeah, code of conduct is not political activism necessarily, but it certainly could include some political activism. And finally, the last question is, hey DT, are you part Native American? And my answer to that is I have no idea. I've never really done any of these like genealogy kind of tests, DNA testing to find out exactly what all you are as far as ethnicities and nationalities and things like that, because for freedom respecting reasons, I don't want to be a part of any of those databases. Now, naturally, I know family members of mine, like I certainly do, like I live in Louisiana, so generally speaking, half the population's white, half the population's black, and there's a lot of mixing, right? So pretty much every white family has black relatives. Every black family down here has white relatives. So I'm sure that if I did, some testing, yeah, I would probably have a lot, obviously white European descent, African American descent. No doubt there's going to be some Native American blood in me, just because my people have been here as far as my family date back a couple hundred years at least. And of course, if your family has been here that long, as far as your ancestors, when obviously the Native Americans kind of were incorporated into the rest of the population, right? Intermarriage and stuff. I'm sure I've got Native American blood in me, but does it matter? Does it matter? What nationalities and races and all make up me? It's not the way I think. I've never been one of these people that identified with race. What does it matter? If you're white, black, Native American, or a mixture, or all three, what the hell does it matter, right? It's an accident of birth regardless. It's not like you had any say in it, right? It's like the people that talk about, hey, I'm a proud black woman or whatever it happens to be. Okay, great. What does that matter, right? Again, it's an accident of birth that you were born into that race, into that gender, into the nationality. Like if you're a proud American or whatever it happens to be, yeah, that's great. You really didn't have any say in the matter, right? So I don't think like that, as far as I never identify with like these immutable characteristics of mine, right? I don't sit around and think, yeah, I'm a bald-headed white guy. Right? I don't, like if people ask me who I am, I'm going to give them much more real answers about who I am essentially. And I think in the end, it really won't matter too much going forward. I think within a few centuries, just because now that the world is such a global world, we're not really going to see people as white or black or Asian or, obviously with, our interracial marriages and interracial children. And eventually the human population will be one race. It really is now. It's just many people are so infatuated with what they see as far as skin pigmentation. They imagine that has some hidden meaning, right? Some meaning to it that it really doesn't, right? Again, a lot of this is just an accident of birth. However we ended up here, again, that's not what we should be focused on. We should not be focused on that. We should be focused on where we're going forward, what we're becoming as a person. And we very much, each and every one of us, have a say in that. Now, before I go, I need to thank a few special people. I need to thank the producers of this episode. And of course, I'm talking about Matt, Steve, Cap, Caveman, Darlof, Lee, Methos, Urion, Paul, Peace Archer, Fedora, Realities for Less, Red Prophet, Roland, Wargento, and Ubuntu, and Willie. These guys, they're my highest tier patrons over on Patreon. Without these guys, this episode of Hate ET would not be possible. The show is also brought to you by each and every one of these fine ladies and gentlemen. All these names you're seeing on the screen right now. These are all my supporters over on Patreon. I don't have any corporate sponsors. I'm sponsored by you guys, the community. If you like my work and want to see more videos, maybe more episodes of Hate ET in the future, please subscribe to DistroTube over on Patreon. All right, guys. Peace.